Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful day. Robert Emmet is shining on us for sure. I'd like to first introduce our wonderful musicians who have volunteered their time here today. On the far left, we have Jesse Winch. Jesse is the heart and soul of the Mid-Atlantic chapter of Kaltori Cultus Aaron, and has really been an inspiration to a lot of us, a multi-talented musician. Next to Jesse is Mitch Fanning on the fiddle. Mitch is the founder of the Bog Band, and if you're not familiar with the Bog Band, you should go on the web and take a look at them. They do wonderful things with young musicians. And Mitch is also the founder of Music and Dance Week, which is probably the foremost fun school every year, every summer here in the Washington area for young musicians. And next to Mitch is Billy McComiskey, a virtuoso, all-Ireland winning button accordionist who has taught a lot of us a lot about Irish music as well as the button accordion. And finally, we have Tony Zisselberger, another very accomplished button accordionist who has taught me, as well as a number of others, a lot of great tunes on the Irish Bach. So let's give them a big hand of applause. Before we start up, I want to make sure everybody is aware of condition number 1 of our site permit, a reminder, of course, of the pandemic time that we're all living in. The number 1 condition requires that everybody over 2 years of age who has not been vaccinated must wear a mask at all times when they are unable to keep a physical distance of 6 feet. So if you're within 6 feet of anybody, please put your mask on. If not, I think there's plenty of space for people to spread out here. And the masks must cover the nose as well as the mouth. So thank you very much for complying with that. For those who don't know me, I am Peter Kissel. I'm the National President of the Irish American Unity Conference. The IAUC holds this commemoration for Robert Emmet every year, and we hold it every year on the Sunday closest to Robert Emmet's execution date, which is September 20th, tomorrow. Today, September 19th, actually marks the anniversary of the date on which Robert Emmet was tried before a kangaroo court of the English misgovernment, and he was forced to stand in the dock for 12 hours, after which he delivered his marvelous speech, which inspires so many of us. I'll talk a little bit more about Robert in a minute. First, though, I want to recognize and thank the organizations and people who have done so much to make this day, this event, possible. And the first among those is the National Park Service. To my right, sitting down is the Rock Creek Park Superintendent, Julia Washburn, who has wonderful oversight of this park as well as all of those within Rock Creek. Standing behind the musicians is Rita Gunther, who has worked with us very closely every year we have had this to make sure the site is as beautiful as it is and to make sure all the program comes together and everything is in place. So thank you, Rita, so much. And also standing behind the musicians is Patrick Johnson, who is newer to the park, but we welcome him and we are glad to have him as part of the team here. I also want to thank I also want to thank earnestly the folks from Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian actually owns the statue behind me of Robert Emmet. It used to be downtown, and the Smithsonian moved it up here with the assistance of the Park Service in 1966. And with us today from the Smithsonian, we have Betsy Brune. Betsy, wave, thank you. Betsy spent many years making this event and this statue and its beauty come together. Ariel, where are you? Ariel O'Connor. And we can thank Ariel in particular for the beautiful gilding on the statue behind me. The gilding had faded over the years, and Jack O'Brien kept writing me and Betsy and Ariel to get it re-gilded. So Jack is very happy today, I'm glad to say. I also want to thank our partners in this event, the Ancient Order of Hibernians. The AOH carried this event for many, many years and then passed it to the IAUC about, I think, 12 years. I think this is our 12th anniversary, maybe our 13th. Yeah, it's our 13th, 2009 we started doing it. They have been very, very instrumental in working with us on this. As you look on your program, you'll see that the local chapter president, Brian Curran, will be sharing his thoughts with us in a few minutes. And so I want to thank all of the AOH members for what they do to make this event come alive and what they do to support the cause of Ireland. And finally, and certainly not the least, I want to thank the Irish Embassy. The Irish Embassy has been a very strong supporter of this event for many years now. Every year since Dan Mulhall has been their ambassador, which is 4 years now, I believe, right? And before him, Ambassador Ann Anderson was a very strong supporter of this. Different members of the embassy have also been very involved with us, and I want to thank them very, very deeply for all of their help. Dan, is anybody else here from the embassy? Okay. Your son is here, right?
Son is here.
What's his name?
Son Jason, and my daughter Julia. Jason.
Julia. I do want to recognize Dan's son, Jason, wave, wave, and his wife, Julia, for coming out today. Even if the only reason was to hear your dad speak, we're glad to have you. So we'll try to get him next year as well. Robert Emmet. Robert Emmet, most of you know the story, and I'm not going to go into the detail of the story. He was born in 1778 to a Protestant family, fairly prominent Protestant family in Dublin, went to Trinity College and ran into Thomas More and a few other rebel-thinking people and became a fierce advocate of Irish independence. His brother was instrumental in the 1798 rising. His brother had to flee Ireland and came to New York, where he rose to become the, I believe, the first Attorney General of New York State. Robert led a very failed rising in 1803. It really had no chance from the start, and he was captured shortly after that, brought to the court in Dublin, and as I mentioned, he was put on an all-day trial. At the end of the trial, on September 19th, Robert made the most iconic speech of all Irish martyrs, all Irish patriots, and we'll hear a little bit of that from Sean Calkins a little before too long. 218 years after Robert Emmet was executed, Ireland is still not completely free and independent or united. So Robert's epitaph cannot yet be written. We are pushing hard to make that happen, hopefully in my lifetime and in the lifetime of most of you. There are still 6 counties in the north of Ireland, as we all know, who are under continued English misrule, brutal and vicious misrule, and it is growing worse. Without going into too much amnesty, just in the last couple of months, England and its players in Northern Ireland have introduced total amnesty for all British soldiers and others who have murdered people during the Troubles. And they are also declaring all-out war on the Northern Ireland Protocol between the United Kingdom and the European Union, despite the fact that England signed that less than a year ago. They have made every indication they intend to break it and break international law. And if that happens, it is going to be very difficult for further progress in the North for quite a while. I don't think it will happen because the European Union has made it very plain they're not going to renegotiate the agreement they signed last December. But in the meantime, it's creating a lot of problems, and what that does, it highlights just how inappropriate, illegal, and brutal English rule in Northern Ireland is. I want to, before I close my opening remarks, I want to give a shout out to Ireland's President, Michael Higgins. Michael Higgins was invited to participate in a ceremony in Northern Ireland this week, which actually commemorates the partition of Ireland. And President Higgins had the sense, the decency, and the knowledge of history to refuse to be co-opted into a ceremony that celebrates the ripping apart of his country. So I'd like to give a hand of applause to President Higgins. The final word I'll say, which a lot of people are working for, is that the partition of Ireland must end, and it must end sooner rather than later, and then we can truly write Robert Emmet's epigraph. At this time, I would like to introduce Rock Creek Park Superintendent Julia Washburn. As I mentioned, Julia has been instrumental in making this event happen for us every year. Julia was appointed the superintendent of Rock Creek Park in 2017 after many years of dedicated service to the park system. She has been served the park in Fort DuPont, downtown Washington, and also at the National Historical Park at Harper's Ferry. Julia started the Kids in the Park program several years ago, which has led to tremendous renewed interest and participation by young children in our park system. So thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, good morning still, I guess it's still morning, to all of you, and thank you for coming out today on this gorgeous day. As Peter mentioned, I'm Julia Washburn, Superintendent of Rock Creek Park, which is the administrative unit that administers this parcel of National Park Service land where we are gathered today. Located in the heart of our nation's capital along this beautiful section of Massachusetts Avenue, this small and seemingly modest reservation serves as a testimony to the sacrifice of the ideals of freedom and democracy of an Irish patriot, Robert Emmet. Robert Emmet, whose statue stands here, was influenced by the struggles of the founding fathers of the United States. This influence is recognized in his famous speech from the dock, which he delivered at the young age of 25 years prior to his execution on September 20th, 215 years ago. As etched in the back right there of this sculpture's base, Emmet proclaimed that he wished to procure for my country the guarantee which Washington procured for America. Emmet's struggle for Irish independence and vision of a new Ireland influenced the Easter Uprising, as Peter was saying, of 1916, and inspired this nation and its leaders to create an area devoted to his ideals of a free and democratic society. This bronze sculpture of Emmet, which stands behind me here, and is part of the collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, is a significant feature for both this park and the city's landscape. Its history can be traced to 1916, when Irish master sculptor Jerome Connor created the Emmet sculpture. Connor was born in Kerry, Ireland in 1874, trained as a stone cutter and a bronze founder. He came to this country in 1888, and in 1910, Connor established a studio right here in Washington, D.C., where he lived until returning to Ireland in 1925. His famous sculptures adorn civic spaces in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Ireland, among other places. This sculpture, originally on display in the main rotunda of the Smithsonian's National Gallery of Art, was moved to this location as part of a rededication of this park to serve it as a centerpiece for First Lady Claudia Taylor, quote, Lady Bird, as we all know her, Johnson, in 1966. It was part of her beautification program for the national capital. Her husband, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, sent a short note that was read aloud to the crowd during the dedication event, which said, "It is entirely fitting that this likeness of Robert Emmet should grace the national parklands of the District of Columbia." Johnson stated he cherished the dream that each man should have the fullest measure of freedom. We Americans are proud to accord a place of honor here in the nation's capital to Robert Emmet, whose struggles and sacrifices bespeak the yearnings of mankind throughout the ages. In 2016, the NPS completed a rehabilitation of this park to recognize its 50th anniversary of initial dedication, the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rebellion, and the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service. National Park Service is honored to be part of this event today and to reaffirm our commitment to continued preservation of this important space, which honors the ideals for which Emmet stood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. I will now ask Sean Culkin, the founder of the Culkin School of Dance, to read the end of Emmet's speech from the dock.
The Emmet speech conclusion. I have but a few words more to say. I am going to my cold and silent grave. My lamp of life is nearly extinguished. My race is run. The grave opens to receive me, and I sink into its bosom. I have but one request to ask at the departure from this world. It is the charity of its silence. Let no man write my epitaph, for as no man who knows my motives dare now vindicate them, let not prejudice or ignorance asperse them. Let them and me repose in obscurity and peace, and my tomb remain uninscribed until other times and other men can do justice to my character. When my country takes her place among the nations of the earth, then and not till then, let my epitaph be written. I have done.
Thank you for that excellent rendition of Robert's speech, Sean. It was very inspiring. One year, if we can't get any speakers, maybe we'll read the entire speech from the dock. It's a long one. Next, I'd like to introduce the DC chapter, the AOH DC chapter president, Brian Curran. We are delighted to have Brian here today to share with us his thoughts and on behalf of the AOH. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. These on. Mr. Ambassador, Superintendent, Peter, guests all, fellow Hibernians and lady Hibernians. What do Robert Emmet and the Star-Spangled Banner have in common? I'll come back to that question in a minute. First, a little bit about the AOH. I'm the president of the District of Columbia Ancient Order of Hibernians. The Ancient Order of Hibernians is America's oldest Irish Catholic fraternal organization. founded in Pennsylvania and New York City in May 1836. The order can trace its roots back to a series of similar societies that extended in Ireland for more than 300 years. Today, the AOH exists in America, Canada, Ireland, England, Wales, and Scotland. However, while the organizations share a common thread, the American AOH is separate and much larger organization. If I may share this, I'd like to share a reading, an article from the national website, the AOH.org, that was written by our national historian, Mike McCormick, back in 2020. What do Robert Emmet and the Star-Spangled Banner have in common? This is an excerpt from the article. Promises of support from France, from other revolutionary societies, and from men of high standing in Ireland made the his efforts seem more likely to succeed than the ill-fated attempt of 5 years earlier. Further, Robert Emmet now had a secret weapon that he felt would make the difference. Developed with help from the chemistry teacher, John Patton, it was an ironclad rocket that delivered a bomb. Their chemical powder mix and a stabilizing shaft made it steadier than anything ever seen before. So it was steadier and more than it was ever before. They built enough of them to provide a military advantage. The young man returned from France in 1802 to coordinate plans in Ireland. Well, we all know the tragic outcome of his failed attempt to free Ireland. But there's an interesting addendum to this story, in that the British seized the remaining rockets from Emmet's apartment, that were the ones that did not blow up, and sent them to Sir William Congreve, who was comptroller of the Royal Arsenal. In 1805, his son claimed these rockets as his own invention. It was then they were called the Congreve rockets, and they produced the rocket's red glare in America's national anthem when they were fired on Fort McHenry in the War of 1812. In the assault on Fort McHenry, the British used the HMS Erebus as a rocket-launching warship. Stocked with Congreve rockets and their launching tubes, it provided many of the rocket's red glare noted by Francis Scott Key, who witnessed the bombardment and was riveted and moved by the American resistance in the face of the new weapon. So, not only does the bold Robert Emmet get no credit for developing the rockets, he is still waiting for his epitaph to be written. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. It's always interesting to hear new facts, new history stories that contribute to overall events like this and frankly to our overall history. Before we move on, I want to welcome Terry Camp. Terry, wave to the crowd. Terry has been instrumental on the Hill in getting this park designated Robert Emmet Park, and we can't thank him enough for that. Before I introduce the ambassador, I'd like to see if our musicians might want to play a few more tunes for us. And I just want to assure everybody that the music car that went by a few minutes ago is not the latest rendition of traditional Irish music. Lovely tunes. Thank you again. It is now my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Ireland's ambassador to the United States, Daniel Mulhall. Ambassador Mulhall was born in Waterford, and he then took his undergraduate and his postgraduate degrees at University College Cork, so I guess he's partly a Cork man. He joined the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1978 and has had many rising positions ever since then. He previously to this posting, he was the ambassador, Ireland's ambassador to London, and prior to that, the ambassador to Germany, among many, many other postings in addition to those two. And he has been a tremendous advocate for his country and for Irish America since arriving here. He is engaged, he has met with us, he has met with Irish Americans across the United States. I believe you just came back from Montana, a trip to Montana, where you visited an Irish memorial there, and also the University of Notre Dame to see a football game. He has been a true friend to us. They say that there are 40 million to 45 million Irish Americans. I think Dan Mulhall has met all but one or two of them. It is my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Mulhall.
Thank you, Peter, Superintendent, President of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, ladies and gentlemen, or as we say in Irish, Agrina Ushla, which covers everyone. It means noble people. All of us are noble. Just to say that I was present on I think it was the 10th of April, 1998, for the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And from my generation, at least, that agreement was a huge achievement for Irish diplomacy, for the Irish government, successive governments, in fact, because that agreement was a long time in the making. The great Northern Irish nationalist Seamus Mallon, died last year or the year before, once said that the Good Friday Agreement was Sunningdale, referring to an earlier agreement from the 1970s. Sunningdale for slow learners was how he described it. But that captured the fact that this was it wasn't an overnight achievement. It was something that was built up over a long period of time. And many of my colleagues spent endless hours and days and weeks and months and years trying to build that agreement, which was finally reached on Good Friday of 1998. And for the Irish government, and for me as the ambassador of Ireland, the representative of Ireland in the United States, that agreement is the front and center. That agreement is at the core of our government's approach to Northern Ireland. And that agreement provides for Irish unity by consent. In other words, it provides for a referendum to be held in Northern Ireland, and it commits the two governments, well, the Irish government and the British government, to accepting the result of that referendum. In fact, it will be two referendums, because there would have to be one held in Ireland as well as in Northern Ireland. So, but the key thing about it is that there is a provision in the Good Friday Agreement for Irish unity. So it's a matter now of working towards that and finding that basis for Irish unity, which we hope will come about in due course. But the current priority for our government is to circumvent the barriers that have been created by the decision of the British government to leave the European Union. But let me come back, I'll come back to that at the very end, but let me just talk about Robert Emmet for a little while. I'm very happy to see descendants of the members of the extended Emmet family here today, and you're very welcome. Your name reverberates through Irish history and to the history of Irish America. Now, if you think about Robert Emmet, his rebellion was quickly suppressed within a day or two. It had no success, and therefore, you would say Robert Emmet ought not to have a hold on our historical imagination. But he does. So why is that? It seems to me this has to do with the power of words. Because words are especially important for politically disadvantaged peoples, like the 19th century Irish were, who didn't have a government to represent them, to speak on their behalf, domestically and globally. Words were also important for the Irish community in America. Now, Robert Emmet's famous speech that we've heard beautifully recited just now reverberated in this country almost as soon as his famous words were uttered. It may have had something to do with the fact that he mentioned George Washington in his speech, and that probably resonated with Irish Americans who were seeking to make themselves part of the fabric of 19th century America. But think of this. Emmet's speech was performed in New York by an Irish immigrant called Mrs. Hamilton in 1806. So within 3 years of Emmet's execution, there were public performances of his speech. How about that? Probably also it was Emmet's out-and-out demand for independence that mattered to Irish Americans throughout the 19th century, because that was what they aspired to too. And Irish American newspapers also kept Emmet's memory in the mind's eye. But it wasn't only Irish Americans who cherished Emmet's words. We know that Abraham Lincoln knew Emmet's famous speech by heart. It is estimated that some 20 writers produced plays with Emmet's life as a subject. Fancy that. Most of those plays originated here in the United States. Titles like Robert Emmet, The Martyr for Irish Liberty, which was written in 1853. A later one was called The Rebels, the Insurgent Chiefs of 1803. Now these, to be quite honest, were not dramatic writing at the highest level, but they testify to the fact that Robert Emmet's image and legacy had an enduring appeal to Irish Americans. There were also Emmet societies across America. I came across one in Savannah, in Georgia, founded in 1877, which drew its membership from the upwardly mobile Irish community in Savannah, Georgia, most of whom came from County Wexford, one of the homes of the rebellion of 1798, which Thomas Addis Emmet took part in, and which also inspired Robert Emmet's rebellion of 1803. And last week in Montana, I visited the cemetery in Butte. They call it Butte, America there, by the way, not Butte, Montana. But anyway, that's the... In fact, I saw an inscription recording a letter from an Irish person in Butte, writing back to his family saying, when you get across the Atlantic, don't stop in America, come to Butte. So, but anyway, in Butte, I actually viewed a significant monument in the cemetery there. And it's in honor, it remembers the leading members of the Robert Emmet Literary Association. And this is in the last couple of decades of the 19th century, when Butte, Montana was a huge mining town with huge numbers of Irish miners working there. Now, this was not a book club, incidentally, because it was an affiliate of the Irish American Fenian organization Clonagale. In the 1850s, two exiled members of the Young Ireland movement who were living in New York, Michael Doheny and John O'Mahony, founded the Emmet Monument Association. And it was a precursor to the Fenian Brotherhood established in the 1850s. As one historian has put it, the only monument the association intended to erect was an independent Irish Republic. My point is that Irish America became a staunch source of support for political movements in Ireland right throughout the 19th century. And Robert Emmet was perhaps, or became, the most potent symbol of Ireland's political aspirations, aspirations that were shared by and often shaped by Irish American influence. Because Irish Americans had an influence on Ireland, because Irish America was a source of inspiration to political movements in Ireland and a source of funding as well, which was vital for the development of political movements in Ireland during the 19th century. So my point is that Irish America kept the flame of Irish independence alive when it might easily have been extinguished in the post-famine decades in Ireland. Now, it wasn't just Fenianism that attracted Irish American support. Movements like O'Connell's repeal, his movement to repeal the Act of Union in the 1840s, had a huge support right across the United States among Irish Americans. The Land League in the 1880s was widely supported. The Gaelic League had a lot of support. Douglas Hyde came here in 1905 and 1906, came to Washington, had his first mint julep down at the Cosmos Club there. He seemed to like it, apparently, so there you are. That influenced Douglas Hyde, maybe in more ways than one. But anyway, so the point I make is that across the board, Irish movements were strongly supported by Irish Americans. Robert Emmet's nephew, also called Robert Emmet, was a New York lawyer and political activist. He was a leading figure in the American repeal movement of the 1840s, and later he became the president of what was called the Irish Republican Union, established in New York in 1848. And its aim was, quote, to promote revolutions for the establishment of republican governments throughout Europe. So this was drawing on the American experience of being a successful republic and encouraging republics to develop in other parts of the world, of course, notably in Ireland, which was their main concern. Much later, another member of the Emmet family, New York physician Thomas Addis Emmet, who was Robert Emmet's grandnephew, was elected president of the Irish National Federation of America, a body dedicated to supporting home rule for Ireland. And finally, in 1917, Colonel Robert Temple Emmet, who was a distinguished American officer who had graduated top of his class from West Point, was part of a delegation of Irish Americans that met the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, to urge him and Britain to offer a generous settlement to Ireland. Irish-American lawyer John Quinn said that the Irish question had in a sense become an American question because of the influence of Irish America, and that Ireland was the outstanding obstacle to complete and cordial relations between the US and Britain. It is clear to me that from the late 19th century onwards, as US power increased, the spectre of Irish America and its potential to complicate Britain's relations with America weighed heavily on successive British governments, not just during the period after 1916, but also during the crisis surrounding Home Rule in the preceding decades. Charles Stewart Parnell was widely lauded by Irish Americans when he came here, and he became the first foreign leader ever to address a joint session of the Houses of Congress here in Washington, D.C. Even though he was not, strictly speaking, the head of any government, he was simply the leader of Nationalist Ireland, but that was sufficient to give him the kudos to be invited to address the Houses of Congress. That 19th century tradition of Irish-American concern for Ireland's fortunes has continued to benefit independent Ireland. From the 1970s onwards, Irish-Americans were instrumental in breaking down official reticence in Washington about American involvement in Northern Ireland. Even when President Kennedy visited Ireland, he was warned by his briefers, the briefing he was given from the State Department, not to make any reference whatsoever to Northern Ireland. But that all changed. From the 70s onwards, Irish Americans were instrumental in encouraging US governments to involve themselves in the affairs of Northern Ireland. And that involvement turned out to be a critical ingredient in securing peace and political agreement in Northern Ireland through the Good Friday Agreement and in the decades since, when American influence has also been brought to bear. And in our day, Irish Americans have been influential in encouraging American support for an open border in Ireland. This American influence was critical in securing the Northern Ireland Protocol, which last year was agreed between the British government and the European Union. And that protocol guarantees an open border on the island of Ireland in perpetuity. Our focus now, the focus of the Irish government, is on ensuring that the protocol is properly implemented so as to ensure that the open border does not come under pressure in the future because of the protocol not being properly implemented. Now, we want to see it implemented in a flexible way. We're not trying to impose or to insist on unnecessary regulations affecting Northern Ireland. We want to see the Northern Ireland economy prosper. Because, by the way, trade between Northern Ireland and my part of Ireland has increased dramatically over the last 9 months, probably because new supply chains are being established in the wake of Britain's departure from the European Union. So, in this respect, looking at the protocol and the way that it's under pressure at the moment, we'll be looking again to Irish America to continue to support the cause of peace and political progress in Ireland. And our Taoiseach will be in New York. He's in New York this coming week. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney, is here on Thursday and Friday of the coming week. And our Deputy Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, is here on Monday and Tuesday of the following week. So after a long hiatus, I haven't had a ministerial visitor for a long time. I now have 3 in the space of about 10 days. So, but I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a way of, again, getting across our message here in Washington and in New York, the message that we have to put across about Ireland, and in particular about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the need for that protocol to be properly implemented so as to avoid a border on the island of Ireland. Now, as the Irish writer Shane Leslie, he's actually a cousin of Winston Churchill, and he was an Irish nationalist. He was a supporter of Home Rule, but not of Irish independence. But at one stage, Leslie wrote the following about Robert Emmet. He said, "His nation has made his name their battle cry, his sorrow their sorrow, his glory their glory." And nowhere was that more apparent in Irish America. Whereas Leslie wrote, when he was visiting America in the second decade of the 20th century, he wrote about the Irish in America. He said, quote, "They remembered Robert Emmet and they knew where they stood." So on behalf of the Government of Ireland, on behalf of the Embassy, on my own behalf, thank you I thank you, and through you, I thank Irish America for the generations of support you've given to Ireland, and I look forward to continuing this journey between Ireland and Irish America for the advancement of both of our countries, but in particular for the advancement of the cause of peace and political progress on the island of Ireland. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those warm and encouraging words on behalf of the Government of Ireland, Ambassador. You always have a special way of making us feel part of the movement of progress in Ireland and make us feel special as descendants of Irish people, as most of us are. In closing, you also reminded me, by the way, of 2 things that I neglected to mention earlier. And one of them is I want to welcome Bill Emmet, who was a descendant of Robert Emmet, and we are very, very grateful to have him here. And I also just want to mention that the IAUC, like our brothers in the AOH, are very, very strong supporters of the Good Friday Agreement. We work for the unification of Ireland, but we work for it, as the agreement provides, peacefully. We reject violence in all of its forms, and we are confident that England will see the light at some point and realize that their, as I call it, misrule in the North is as harmful to them as it is to the people in the North. Finally, I do want to recognize and thank our videographer, Mike Gaiman, and his young son and assistant, Leo, for stepping in on very short notice to record this for us. And Leo just celebrated his bar mitzvah 2 weeks ago, so. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, musicians. Thank you, Park Service. Thank you, Smithsonian. Thank you, AOH. And thank you, Ambassador Mulhall. Have a good day, everybody.
That was lovely, Peter. Very successful, don't you think?